everybody, and welcome to On the Road with AutoTrader, where we make car stuff simple for Canadians. My name is Jodi, Picnic Pants Lie, and I am the editor-in-chief of AutoTrader.
And I am Dan Alika, and I am AutoTrader's very shocked road test editor. By both the Flourish? Okay, those are your picnic pants.
My famous picnic pants that you love to roast me on.
You like to get out in front of these. And then I'm like, but nobody was going to see this until you pointed them out.
I just put them on this morning, and I'm like, Dan's for sure going to say something.
I never said anything. We had lunch before this, and I never even brought them up. The first time I brought them up was in the office, and you thought I was making fun of you, and I was like, no, they were like fun. But then you went and told everyone, well, I'm wearing picnic pants. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, you brought it on yourself.
It's a thing now. I think people at work just expect me to show up in like
Next, you're gonna have to bring a picnic basket and
we're gonna have to a whole thing. I'll make a charcuterie board or something.
Well,
today, Dan and I are going to be chatting about what in our minds would be the perfect infotainment system, because we realize we complain about this and we have so many issues with infotainment systems that are out there, but it is like so essential for the success of a car to have a good infotainment system for so many different reasons.
Yeah.
Number one is safety, obviously.
Sure, but I mean, okay, let's just back it up and look at it fundamentally, right? It's no different than carrying a smartphone.
Yeah.
We all do this. Even if you look, sure, I know some people like Alex Reed, a good friend of ours, he, has rejected the smartphone technology. Him and his wife both have gone to flip phones. But the vast majority of people between the age of 12 and 80 have smartphones nowadays. So it's no different to me than when you're driving, like your vehicle, you expect sort of adjacent technology in a new vehicle. So expectations are that you have something with, touchscreen infotainment, and that it's easy to use. And then that gets into the safety side of things, because they should be engineered to be simple, straightforward, not distracting in any way. But then that's also opened this whole new side of things where they've gone, sideways, in my opinion, in a lot of areas.
Oh, I agree with that totally. And before phones became so mainstream, it was pretty easy to get everything was physical, right? There was no digital buttons. Everything was a physical knob or a switch or something. And then when people started using cell phones, it obviously became a problem because distracted driving became a lethal problem that is, causing a lot of collisions, killing a lot of people. And so they had to figure out a way to integrate our smartphones while also making it less distracting. And I think for a little while we were getting better.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it crashed down and now we're worse again.
Yeah. I mean, I think people in general, quite often we saw during the pandemic, right, just a rise in distracted driving and cell phone use. And at first I thought, and I think you thought the same thing, like maybe because there are less drivers on the road, you're noticing the bad behavior. It's not necessarily that incidents are up. It's that it's just more obvious. But I think as time has gone on and traffic has rebounded back to sort of pre-pandemic levels, you are seeing more people, especially in the GTA, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that I still am surprised when I travel and I see people, in other states, when I'm in the States, certain ones that still don't have hands-free legislation, people just openly talking on their cell phones behind the wheel. But this has been on the books in Ontario since 2010, I believe.
And that's pretty early, actually.
That you weren't allowed to use your phone behind the wheel. I remember because I was a newspaper intern at the time. And I was like, okay, well, I'm, going from literally going to crime scenes and all of this stuff. So I went out and I had this little Motorola Bluetooth earpiece that I used to use behind the wheel because I was terrified of getting a distracted driving charge or a ticket. And then also, as I understood the dangers of it, I was like, well, can't do this, got to keep the phone in the glove box or in the center console or whatever. I don't know what it's going to take for this to resonate with people.
I don't know. And it's funny because they've done a lot of studies on this where it's like a lot of people they survey understand that it's dangerous, but they do it anyway. Yeah. Most people still do it, even though they acknowledge that, yes, it causes collisions. Yes, it's dangerous. Then Are you so addicted that you can't physically stop yourself?
I mean, I think the answer is yes. So then that gets into Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Yes, I mean, surely it's Google and Apple, like they don't do stuff, out of the goodness of their hearts.
No.
So, there's obviously data that they are gathering by, us using these systems. But to me, it's like carrying around your smartphone. Whether you're in the vehicle or not, your movements being tracked. Sure, it's like anonymously, but it's the same thing. When you see those studies about, like foot traffic in the downtown core, hasn't rebounded, that data is gathered through anonymous cell phone data. So you walking around Bay Street in Toronto with your cell phone in your pocket, if TELUS is providing access to this data or whoever it may be, that's just how it works. And it's the same thing with your in-car stuff. Google is benefiting from this. Apple is benefiting from this. But to me, it's that necessary evil of I would rather have fingertip access to my music, podcasts, messages, to have that read to me over the speakers and to be able to use voice to text to respond to messages is great.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes a safety related, asset.
I mean, and I will say that like Android Auto, because I don't use Apple CarPlay, so I don't know. So Android Auto also has a couple safeguards built in. Like, for example, if you're in Spotify and you're like scrolling through podcasts or whatever, after a couple scrolls, it's like, oh, it's time to pay attention. Come back later and will allow you to scroll again. I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty good because it prevents you from being stuck there for too long, right?
Apple Music, the safeguard in most systems. What frustrates me is the inconsistency, and I guess that's sort of what this whole episode is about, right? Is the things that we like, the things that we don't like, the steps backwards that we're seeing with these systems as the developers and the automakers start to kind of play with things a little bit too much, in my opinion. So not all brands do this, and I wish they would. But Apple Music is limited in the number of like artists that you can see when you go to your library and you click artists or songs, whatever the category is. It'll display your like most recent listens, but let's say it's like 10 and then that's it. You can't look at like the alphabetical list. But you can also use voice command to say play whatever. I don't, an artist or a playlist or whatnot. And that to me is a good safeguard because it means that, like you said, you're not scrolling endlessly through your list of artists and not paying attention to the road ahead. It's the same thing with maps. Quite often, but not always, there is a limitation placed on that. So if you try to input a destination using the on-screen keyboard, it will say keyboard limited while vehicle is in use or whatever, in motion. And then you come to it. Some of them, if you come to a stop at a light or a sign or whatever, you can use it. Others, the vehicle has to be in park.
And it's funny because in some vehicles that I've seen, some will be like, oh, this is only for the passenger to use. Are you the passenger? And you can easily be like, yes.
Of course. And that's a liability thing on
I know, but it just kind of, it's like a half-baked measure.
Of course.
But yeah, so when Android Auto and Apple CarPlay first came out, I feel like it was a major game changer because it did make things a lot more convenient. And for me, it did really cut the need to like check my phone. Not that I was really doing it, but it really made me feel better about like, oh, I'm not missing anything because all the important stuff is coming through, right? Nowadays, I feel like you said, it's kind of gone too much in the away direction that we should be going.
Yeah, like for example, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto we've ranted about before is so inconsistent, and I'm still not sure who really is to blame because, sometimes I think it's the automaker, and then other times I'm like, no, this is clearly like an Apple issue. For me, again, I have an iPhone, so I can only speak to, and I think it's good like that you have, especially when we're doing comparisons because you have your Android so we can see how both systems are. But these wired systems seldom, if you were using an OEM, like a basically an Apple or a Samsung or whatever brand your phone is, but if the cable is designed for that and actually like, a data, because this is the problem. People that go to 7-Eleven and buy one of those cheap cables, those are power cables. They're not data transfer cables. And that's where connectivity issues start to happen, right? So for me, if I use like the supplied cable or buy another one with USB-C from Apple, wired has been pretty much flawless from the start, I would say. Ever since wireless Apple CarPlay came out, it's been so inconsistent. And then I could understand why someone would reach for their phone because they're like so used to having that,
right?
That access to their phone. But now you're seeing brands or OEMs like General Motors. But it's odd because GM has moved away from integrated Apple CarPlay and Android Auto because it's using this Google built-in infotainment system. So the actual software itself is developed by Google. And in exchange, GM has decided not to use a smartphone pairing system. But the problem is GM claimed, and this was like such BS, GM was like, no, people are using their phones too much, so we got rid of this in order to limit cell phone use. It's like, okay, come on, dude. I may have been born yesterday, but I've been up all night. Like you're this, if you don't allow me to pair my phone, not me personally, but
right.
then
people.
That's exactly that is encouragement for me to use it. Whereas if you're offering the option to not use it, then people aren't like that. It's not even a choice.
And so like only I think a lot of the EVs now are not using Apple CarPlay. I just drove a new Buick that is running on this Google infotainment system, and it does offer Apple
That's the
CarPlay.
Thing. It's the gas powered GM models.
It's so weird that they've separated that way.
I think it's because of the range estimates and stuff. Like it's a more robust version of the Google-based infotainment system in an EV. So the integrated Google Maps does stuff like give you a range estimate for when you punch in a destination, both when you get to that destination and if you were to do a return trip, which I absolutely love. Because let's say that I don't know, it's the drive from home to work or you have a meeting somewhere. It's nice to know whether you're going to make it back without having to stop to charge.
Yeah.
So I like that. But then again, it also sort of calls GM's bluff because now I do think that the plan is, at least as of right now, to eventually phase out Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in all vehicles. But as of right now, GM is only doing that with its EVs. So you're kind of calling the brand's bluff and saying, oh, you're claiming that it's this safety initiative, yet you're still allowing people who buy your gas-powered vehicles to hook their phones up, but not the electric ones.
I don't think it's a safety thing at all. This is maybe like a licensing issue. Like they'd have to pay more money to put it in certain cars. I really don't buy the safety thing.
And the worst part is Apple has developed is in the midst of developing a similar, like a CarPlay infotainment interface. So not just hook your phone up, like an actual built-in interface. So now there's that rivalry with Google and Apple that is extended into the automotive space. But Google told GM, you can have the old CarPlay, like the version that you hook up wirelessly or plug your phone in, for free. There's no licensing fee. And GM said no. Why? That's when you have to ask why. Because it makes no sense to me. And this is that step backwards. People are addicted to their phones. This is a reality. Colin Shepard emailed that question, how do we reduce distracted driving? The reality is this is the way. Mm-hmm. We've opened Pandora's box of connectivity. We cannot seal it back up.
Well, and that's the thing is because when Android Auto and Apple CarPlay first got here, everyone was so relieved because individual automakers have such a hard time making systems that are easy to use and intuitive. And they were like, and we're a little bit different because we get into a different car every week. And every single week we're like, oh, this is so different. It's so frustrating and so hard to learn. And so when they kind of just standardized everything by doing Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, we were like, great, this is so much easier. Google Maps is infinitely better than any native navigation system that any automaker has ever created, period. Yeah. That's just the facts. And so now that they're going away from this, they're also not offering us a better alternative.
Yeah. And anybody who argues against this, I mean, it's facts. And there's a reason why, remember all the rumors and then confirmations that, Sony was developing its own car and Apple was developing a car and Google was developing a car. And then they stopped doing that. And the reason why is because they realized, oh, it's a lot harder than we thought it was going to be. So that's why Sony and Honda have hooked up, right? It's like Honda's good at the car building part. Sony's good at the technology integration and at the user interface. So why not work together to try to come up with something and play to our strengths? That is very much the case with infotainment. Automakers, for whatever reason, they've tried, they've hired people from these tech companies. For whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to work. Therefore, taking advantage of the smartphone makers themselves and their expertise and saying, hey, Apple CarPlay, to me, and I personally, I used to have an Android phone, my silly days. And I remember using Android Auto, and personally, I like the Apple CarPlay interface better because it, to me, is the definition of smartphone mirroring. It looks exactly like a phone or a tablet on the screen. You've got the same icons, the same everything, and then just the functionality has been adapted to work, as a voice to text and a hands-free system. Android Auto, I know you can pull up your menu with your icons and stuff, but to me that kind of home screen, I just never got into that widgeted home screen. But the reality is it's still good, and a lot of people, yourself included, like it because Google is breaking it down based on user data and saying we know how people like to interact with touch devices. This is the same reason why Mazda and all these other, harebrained automakers who go, no, we're not integrating touch, but we'll give you Apple CarPlay. And it's like, but touch, those systems are based around touch and voice. When you try to use some stupid controller on a console,
never works as well.
It never works because they are touch-based systems.
And that's the whole reason why they're so easy to use and user-friendly, because everyone's familiar with how to do that. Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate that this decision has been made so shortly. Realistically, Apple CarPlay hit the market in 2015, 2016, and same with Android Auto. They were right around the same time. It's not the same as, let's say with radios and stuff that they developed and they're all the same. And then it's been decades that they function the same way. We've really only had less than a decade of this functionality. So to be scaling it back already, just as people have started to kind of get the hang of it, not that there's a steep learning curve and that's the whole point, just seems like such a bad idea because we need to have our phones, Bluetooth isn't enough.
No.
That integration, I'm not saying it's right, but it's a reality.
Okay, so we talked a lot about what's wrong.
Yes.
What would, to you, make the perfect solution for infotainment and smartphone connectivity?
Just give me Apple CarPlay with a very, Toyota's version, Toyota's infotainment systems have never been great.
No.
That is the thing I will say. GM, even prior to this Google built-in system, GM's infotainment in the last 10 years has been pretty good. I would say one of the better automakers to execute because it was smartphone-like. And then same with, formerly FCA, now Stellantis. Uconnect is a very good system. Give me either of those with Apple CarPlay. That's all I need.
Right.
And the funny thing is, I don't even use outside of, as part of the job, making sure that everything functions well and whatever. I plug my phone in and just, that's it. I seldom use anything inside that infotainment system.
No, I'm the same way because it's just not as easy to use. You know, it's so funny. I was just driving an Aston Martin and they don't have Android Auto because no Aston Martin drivers use Android phones. They all use Apple phones.
Yeah.
But I needed to go somewhere and you know me, I never know where I'm going. So I need my maps. I refuse to use their map system. So I just propped up my phone in the cup holder and did that. That was my solution.
This is another, and don't get me wrong, this Google-based system with Google Maps integrated, it solves the problem. But this is the other side of it. We've become so reliant on our phones that in terms of directions, we're not. I remember growing up, my parents had maps in the car just in case, and my dad grew up in Montreal. We would go visit family all the time. But I remember as a kid being so fascinated with my dad's ability to, and this isn't just like the way that you look up to your parents, right? But just like that ability to know where we were going without having like a list of directions or having my mom. And sometimes when I remember going to Cooperstown, New York to go to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And yeah, my mom was helping out with directions because we'd never been there before. And we came back through the Adirondacks. And I remember having the map out. But for the most part, it was like, you know, there was never, we didn't get lost. My dad knew how to get, and same with my mom. But, you know, if we were on a road trip and my dad was driving, it was always seemed like he knew kind of how to get around. Nowadays, that is less and less the case. Even for me, going back to Guelph to visit family, I know where I'm going, can't remember half the street names anymore.
Right.
You know, so I have Apple CarPlay and, you know, Google Maps, because I've told you before, like I'm not a masochist and I'm not using Apple Maps. That is one more example of how this works. Apple tried to develop a dedicated maps app
and failed miserably.
It was pure butt. It was terrible because Google is good at that and was way ahead of the curve. And Apple hasn't completely abandoned Apple Maps, but kind of admitted defeat and scaled back its plans, you know, that it was going to have the whole Street View thing, just like Google and all that, and kind of like pulled back from that. That is one more example of a technology company being like, look, we know where our strengths are and we know where our weaknesses are. So let's play to those. And automakers should be doing the same by letting Apple give them the free software.
Absolutely.
I don't know what GM's thinking. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I really don't get it. But okay, so for me, what makes a good infotainment system is obviously having smartphone mirroring. But besides like getting out of that.
You're going to say a home button.
Yes.
I knew it.
That's my biggest thing.
You're
like,
obsessed
honestly,
with home
if you have a
buttons.
home button, things become so much easier.
Does your phone have a home button?
Of course it has a home button. All phones have home buttons.
That's not true.
What?
Where's my home button? This is a
How do you get to your
iPhone.
main page?
What do you mean? Like if I'm on here?
Yeah.
Then I would just swipe up from the...
I mean, that's a home button, essentially. It's a home function.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
home
sorry.
function.
Maybe not a home button.
Okay. I understand now.
So for me...
You obsess... So guys, for those of you who don't know, as my job title might, suggest, I edit all the reviews that our contributors write. And obviously I don't edit my own reviews. Jodi edits those, but I edit Jodi's reviews. And there are certain like items in that review that I can count on. It's like clockwork. And one of them is going to be whether or not there's a home button. And for me, like sometimes if the infotainment system is really bad, I might mention it in terms of like the user experience isn't great. But Jodi, without fail, will mention whether it has one or whether it doesn't. Whereas for me, I don't mention it unless it's bad.
Right.
But the home button is a passion of yours.
I'm a home button stan. Like I love my home button.
A home button home girl.
Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like these days, especially with a lot of most automakers moving away from having physical buttons and knobs, and now everything's like these touch capacitive panels.
Okay, can we talk? I don't remember if we talked about this before, so I'm just gonna throw it out there. So the reason those exist, guys, is ultimately, it does come down to it being cheaper and easier for automakers. So I understand why, because you can quickly, send an update through and change the functionality, change the layout, surely part of the thought process is features and functions that they can charge you either a subscription for,
for sure,
or charge extra for.
But that's not what they tell you. They tell you they wanted a streamlined look. And I'm like, no, you just made things more complicated.
It's done. But I also look at it and say, okay, if you have a bank of climate buttons and for whatever reason, if that stops working, if one of the buttons breaks or whatever, you have to replace that panel versus a touchscreen. Yes, of course, a touchscreen can break, but the reality is that functionality can just be a hard reset away from fixing. Or I use the example of Subaru. There wasn't I think it was the way that the climate panel at the bottom, when Subaru introduced the vertically oriented touchscreen, and there was something that was missing from the climate, whether it was like heated seats, there was something that wasn't there. And Subaru just pushed through an update to make it fixed because the complaints were enough that Subaru went, okay, we better fix this. And so that is, I understand from a sort of ease of integration, like you can change it up a lot, but to your point, it's not as good. And what I always say is muscle memory matters. And it's just like when you're typing on do this experiment at home. Forget the car for a second. Take a laptop and type away. And I guarantee you, if you use a computer, even, even rarely throughout the week, you can type without looking at the screen.
Because you can feel where
the keys are. And then you remember, okay, the A key is here. And from there you go. Try doing the same thing on a tablet. Open up an iPad, or are there even Android?
You might as well be blindfolded at that point.
That's what I'm saying, because you cannot, there's no muscle memory. So climate controls and audio controls are the same thing. Once you get used to a car, you can feel across, okay, the fourth button, I know that's the auto button for my climate control, and you can reach over and hit that without taking your eyes off the road. With a touchscreen, you're not going to go, oh, this is approximately okay, I've moved my finger. I sense I must be getting close now. It's like, that's not possible.
No, because now it requires you to physically take your eyes off the road and locate where you're going to go.
And anybody who tells me, we get it all the time in comments and in emails and stuff, well, it's got voice command. You can do that with voice command. The reality is, it is if I quickly, let's say that you're driving and the windows suddenly fog up, okay? What is easier, to quickly know that you can reach down and hit the defrost button, or to be like, hit a button on the steering wheel, or go, hey, Mercedes, activate my defrost? Like, that to me defies logic.
And in other voice command systems, you have to say the exact command to get what you need to do.
Yes.
And most of the time, you don't know what that is. So you're just sitting there talking, and they're like, sorry, I didn't understand that.
It's like
and
a
you're
stubborn
like,
partner in that way. Well, I didn't hear you. Anyways.
Yeah. And another complaint about these touch capacitive panels, and this is a complaint that I know is very specific to me, but a lot of other people too who have fabulous nails, is that it makes it a lot harder for us to use touch capacitive panels, because like physical buttons are always going to be so much easier. And I know that's a stupid complaint to make, but it's something I run into.
Sure. I mean,
and I feel like a lot of other people run into that problem too.
I get it. No, I'm not discounting that. It's just like it's one of those things where I'm sure, who knows, right? I mean, I don't want to make it that issue, but it's like, let's be real. A lot of automotive engineers, are dudes,
that's what I mean.
Like,
they don't think about those things.
Aren't part of the,
absolutely not. But that's why I think we need more women in automotive in general, because I feel like you have to have that added perspective when you're engineering things for everybody.
Absolutely.
But anyway, we're running low on time, so before this Ask an Expert, here is a message from your friends at AutoTrader. Having trouble finding your perfect car at the perfect price? The answer is AutoTrader. Car prices are dropping across Canada, and AutoTrader has hundreds of thousands of new and used cars to choose from. Get a great deal on your perfect car by visiting AutoTrader today. Today's Ask an Expert comes from Jason.
Hello, Jason.
Hello, AutoTrader. I'm a big fan of your podcast.
Thank
you guys
you.
talk a lot about a lot of useful and relevant car
topics. I thought you were ending it there. You guys talk a lot.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, thanks, Jason.
We do. Thanks. I purchased a new 2022 RAV4 LE all-wheel drive a couple years ago. I've been following the factory-recommended service schedule provided by the dealership. We just ate 48,000 kilometers, and the dealership recommends the brake fluid to be replaced. This is $170 at the dealership.
Mm-hmm.
Talked to a few friends and family who are more knowledgeable about cars, and they said that they don't replace brake fluid unless there are leaks or dirt in the system. And typically, you would check it periodically and top it off as needed. What's your take on brake fluid for modern vehicles? Does it need to be replaced if there are no issues? And this is a two-part question. That's the first part.
So should we answer this part first? Okay. This is a tough one. The first thing I will say, instead of, now this could be like the accuracy of that information that the dealer is providing you could be spot on. First thing I would do if I were in your shoes is open my owner's manual and check the owner's manual, because that service advisor might be giving you kind of generic advice or advice that they know from a different vehicle. It might not apply to the specific vehicle that you're driving. So your 2022 RAV4 LE. The other side of it, if it is true, what did you say it was 48,000 kilometers?
Yep.
That does seem low. here's ultimately my advice. That car, that RAV4 cost you what, 40 grand? You love it. You've said that you've enjoyed it over the last couple of years. Man, ultimately, what's $170? And I don't know what kind of driving that you do, but if it's a lot of stop and go traffic, just like any other automotive lubricant, brake fluid breaks down over like a period of time and use and every, there are a lot of variables, but for $170 to flush that system, that actually seems kind of cheap to me. And I would gladly, do that to because ultimately what you are doing. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Dealers, they're not out, and automakers as well, they're not out to get you. And if something goes wrong and they go, oh, you didn't replace your brake fluid, so therefore we're not honoring your warranty. But the reality is that is what these recommended service intervals are for, is to make sure that you are keeping up with that routine maintenance to protect yourself and your vehicle. So if there is an issue that you can say, well, look, I followed this, to the letter. I made sure that I did all of these changes, all of these recommended replacements and whatnot, and you're just protecting yourself and your vehicle to not only prolong the lifespan, but to also make sure in the event that something goes wrong, that you have protected yourself. So I would do it if it says so in the owner's manual.
Yeah, so that was the second part of his question, is that he was worried about not following the dealer recommended service out of fear that he would void his warranty. And that's a very real fear.
Totally.
And I think where you can, especially I think with Toyota, because a lot of these vehicles are they have a reputation for being very reliable. They can really only guarantee that reliability if you follow the service maintenance,
That's
right?
the thing, right? Like I said, it's not, look, I used to work at the OEM level. I've seen these come through, and I've seen people that haven't followed their service interval and still get their warranties honored. It's just that, there's always that chance. And to me, what's $170 in the grand scheme of that vehicle that's going to last you 8 or 10 years. We all know that the RAV4 is outstanding for its reliability. And as long as you take care of it, it's going to take care of you. So if it says so in your owner's manual, I would just do the work and, call it a day.
Okay, Jason also added that in the last time he went to take his car in, they charged him $10 for protective floor mats, which to me seems like a bit of a rip. I would kind of, I think he means like that paper you put on the floor mat so you don't get it dirty. But like my dealership does that for free.
Yikes. If that's true,
they cover everything with plastic as part of the process. So
I'd be asking questions next time I go in.
If you see fees that you don't understand or agree with, feel free to ask them to explain it.
And
honestly.
Don't sign anything. That's always my thing, right? When I'm getting my vehicle serviced, I take a look at what I'm signing before I sign it, just to make sure if it's an oil change, to make sure that there's nothing that I wasn't expecting on that list. I'll give you a good example. Now, this wasn't at a dealership. This was at just a service center. But my dad went in for some work on one of my parents' cars, and I want to say it was like tires or brakes. It was something, pretty, or no, sorry. It was an oil change before he was going on a trip up to Northern Ontario, a fishing trip with my uncle and my cousin. So he went in and, just like any shop, they do like a visual inspection, right? Like included in the oil change. So he went, got that done. And then they drove, and they were driving along the highway somewhere in like way Northern Ontario, like near Sudbury. And he started to notice like a vibration in the steering wheel, and pulled over and noticed that 2 of his wheel studs had sheared right off. And when he checked another one, it was loose. So he, they limped it to a garage. They got it fixed. The guys that did it were incredible, super nice. Did it for cheap. They felt really terrible about what was going on. But my dad looked at because my mom said, when he called my mom to say what was going on, my mom was like, didn't you just have that in for an oil change and whatever? And so he looked, and it said like a 5-point inspection. So he went into that shop and said like, hey, if you did check my wheels and tires
shouldn't
that
have
you should have.
happened.
Yeah. And so the luckily nothing happened to my dad and my uncle when they were in the car, but and this shop ended up splitting, like they gave my dad half of what he paid to get this job done up in Northern Ontario. But that's just one of those examples of like, read that, document, read that form that we all sign when we bring our vehicles in for service, right? Make sure that you see what's being done and keep that for your records in case something like this goes wrong, that you can say, well, you were supposed to do this work and you didn't, or, that you're now charging me for something that I never asked for in the first place.
Yeah. A couple times they've done that with me too, especially because I have a diesel car and they like to top up the DEF, but they charge you for it. And it's always way more expensive than doing it yourself. And that's something like you can go to a Canadian Tire and buy DEF and it's cheap. Okay. So I never agree to that. And they're always like, okay.
Your car is always fresh to death. Get it?
That's good. I like that. Thank you so much, Jason, for your question. If any of you would like to ask Dan or I a question, you can email us at expert@trader.ca. But that wraps up this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Drive safe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.